lesson. So we're going to start off with kerning. And why do you need to know these terms and what this is? Well, especially when you go into InDesign, you're going to be messing around with this a lot more. But also in Illustrator, we mess around with it all the time. I'll show you why. So let's start off with kerning, understanding what kerning actually is. So for kerning itself, it's the space between each letter. So for example, if I click here in the middle, between the E and the R, I can put up my kerning, which is here, let me show you, by 300. So you guys will see the difference. And there's my space. So why is this important? Why is it important to know the kerning that you can change between letters and the space between all letters between your whole text? That's the main difference between kerning and tracking, by the way. So tracking would be messing around with space between a whole paragraph, for example. So right now that's kerning. Let me show you what the difference is between tracking. So let me just zoom in out a little bit. Here's a paragraph. And when it comes down to tracking, if I set up my tracking, I won't put it to 300, I'll put it to 100 so you guys can see the difference. It's gonna space out the space between each letter in the entire paragraph. So that's the difference between kerning and tracking. Kerning is just between the space of each individual letter. Tracking space between all the letters in a paragraph or in a sentence, for example. However, don't worry about it. Most people just stick with the term tracking. So if you ever have a boss and he tells you to adjust the tracking, just make sure that you know what he's telling you. Is it just the space between two letters or the space between all letters within a paragraph? Because sometimes they get that wrong, kerning and tracking. So with tracking, again, I'm gonna put it as -10. So you guys can see what's the difference. You guys can see that all the letters are a little bit more tight. Now with kerning, same deal. We did put a huge space right here at 300. We're gonna bring it back to 0. That's usually what is the norm. And then I'm gonna show you why we mess around with these things. So usually you wanna mess around with tracking and kerning because it makes it easier for people to read the text. So, or if you're doing a big title, for example, usually you're looking at kerning. So I'm just gonna give you a quick example, the easiest one. If we just put in 1 dog, 2 dogs, and let's leave it actually without a space. So let's take out the space that we left between the 2 and the D and the 1 and the D. And if we zoom in, you will see the difference that we have there. So as you guys may notice, there's a space between the 1 and the D, the 2 and the D, and what's the problem there? Well, you might notice there's a humongous space between the number 1, although it's not an actual space. So right here, you will see this huge space between the 1 and the D, the letter D, but between the number 2 and D, it's gonna be way more tight. So that's the difference between the two. So that's when you have this huge title usually, and that's usually when people adjust the kerning, not within a paragraph. They don't really look at those details. Those are really into typography will do that, but others will just leave it. But in a title, you will notice those differences. And that's when you adjust the kerning between these things so they match up and doesn't look off. Because right now, these spaces just look off. And again, there is no actual space between these, so I didn't create a space. This is a continuous letter, so if I delete, it's gonna delete the 1. If I type in 1, it's gonna put in the 1. So what we have to do there is adjust the kerning. So again, you would go right here and just make it minus. It would be around, if you wanted to make it more like the 2, you would set this at maybe -50 or so, or even more. Let's try 100 to try to match it up. And that will look more like the 2 between that space. Or if you don't like this space, the 2 and the D, you would put that up, for example. So you bring that up by 100 maybe, and there's that space. So you can mess around with it, and you will be messing around with this. If you're creating big titles, these things will get in your way. And that's the huge difference between professional work and people that just learn how to use Illustrator, for example. They will leave those mistakes up there. However, people that know how to use Illustrator but are actually graphic designers will adjust these things because they will notice these things in typography. Anyways, we're just gonna set this back to 0. And by the way, if you're thinking, wait, how is he here and what is all this stuff? Well, under Windows, just going to Workspace, under Workspace, going to Typography, and you're gonna see the setup that I have at the moment. So you will see these options. But later on, I'm gonna teach you more into the Workspace and how to get started with Illustrator. This is just to show you something about typography. Later on, I'm gonna show you exactly about workspaces and all that stuff that has to do with Illustrator. Anyways, once it comes down to tracking, this is something that you might want to mess around with just to make it easier for people to read. For example, if we bring this up in tracking, it just makes it look odd, but it has a certain feeling. So you might want even to go for this just for an artistic feel, but it's not that great. Usually what you want is to just leave it at 0. Sometimes 0 is a little bit too tight, so you might want to bring it up by 10, for example, and that'll make it a little bit better. So you guys can see those differences, and they're huge differences actually. And something that also helps you out is leading. So leading is the space, and I did this on purpose already, it's the space between right here, the sentences. So what I'm talking about is this space. So the space that we have between each one of these in a paragraph or sentences, that's the space that we're adjusting. So this space, that's leading. Again, leading, that would be the option here. You guys will see it up here. I put at 38, set leading. And usually you do want to bring it up just to make it easier for people to read. And that's all you guys want. You guys want to make it visually appealing plus easy to read. So you can already see the difference between here. This one has 28 leading versus this one at 38. 38 is already a little bit better. It might be a little bit too much, that's true, but it actually makes it easier to read than this. This makes it seem too tight. And sometimes, yes, at your job, you might have to adjust your leading just to fit in the text that they want you to do. However, keep in mind that if they give it too much text, sometimes you could talk to your boss and tell them, hey, can we minimize this just to make it fit better? Or for people to just to digest this a little bit better, just read it more fluent. But those are the 3 basic things that you guys should know: kerning, tracking, and leading when it comes down to typography. Obviously, there's more options right here you guys can get into, such as baseline shift, vertical scale, and all that stuff. Well, vertical scale, I wouldn't mess around with that too much. You might want to do that again when you come down to titles. We can get into that a little bit later on, especially when we go into InDesign. We're going to take a look at even more typography there. But anyways, let's just move on to color theory. And again, we're going to go throughout the most simple things. We're taking a look at RGB versus CMYK. So RGB is the type of document that I have this on at the moment. And I'm going to show you that up here. You guys see this? RGB and CMYK. So I created 2 different files. So this one's CMYK, this one's RGB. And what are these? Well, right here, RGB is a color mode you guys want to design if it's something made for screens. So anything made for screens, whether it's TV, your tablet, your phones, computers, websites, will be done in RGB. So if you guys going into Illustrator, you guys going to new, and you start off with something, you should know what you're working on. So from here, you guys can go right away into web. And if you click on web, right away, your color mode will automatically go into RGB color. And a lot of other things will change as well, such as this. Everything's going to be measured in pixels and so on. Whereas if you go into print, you will notice that it's going to change your color mode to CMYK. Plus, it's no longer going to be in pixels, but points. So here we go. Even the scale of things would be read differently. So why does this matter? Well, if you guys try to print something that you created in RGB, especially when it comes down to really bright colors, such as this green, once you print it, it's going to be a lot darker. But again, that depends on your local printer. I had printers before that they can print something that's RGB and comes out perfect. However, especially with large scale printers, you want to work on something that's CMYK. And that's because that's what the colors that they mess around with. So if you want something really bright, mess around with the colors that they're working with. So again, I'm just going to go on and change my workspace. And I'm going to go down to painting because that will focus on colors. So this one right here, just to show you the difference, I'm going to go into new swatch, and these are the swatches that we're messing around with. And we're going to get every single color from within these 3. Again, this would be for screens. So right now we have red, and then we have green. So this one right here is a green. So if you go to new swatch, you guys will see it's green. The whole way green. That has nothing blue, nothing red in it. It's a pure green for screens. Then we take a look at this one. Take a look in the swatch, which we don't have to do that every time. But anyways, it has only blue, and red and green, it has 0. And this is the code for it. Now if I wanted to change this into red, I can just bring it down to 0, bring up the red, and there we go. It's a pure red. Let me just bring it back into blue, press OK. And that's RGB, red, green, and blue. So again, this would be for anything that has to do with a screen. And if you want to print, well, depends on your local printer. Now, if you guys want to make something that's for printing, so a magazine or anything that has to do with printing, well, you guys want to work with CMYK colors. So you would start off the document with CMYK colors. So if you go into swatches this time, it's gonna be different. So new swatch, you're gonna have these options. So as you guys can see, cyan, magenta, yellow, and yeah, black. Those are your options right here. So this is a pure cyan. The next one would be a pure magenta. So if you take it down, we can go into the next color, which is a pure yellow. Take it down to 0, we can go to pure black. So once again, those are the colors that the printers actually have on their printing machines in order to make all the colors that you guys want to make. So from within these colors, we can make any other color. So if we bring this down a little bit, we bring this up like that, like so, we can go on and make any other colors, as you guys can see. So if we bring that up, we take this down a lot. Well, if we take down the black, we can see a little bit more of the colors. So here we go. If we can mess around with and make any color that we need in order to print. Now, once again, once we get into InDesign, I'm gonna talk about a little bit more about process colors and spot colors. Spot colors, and there's some colors that you guys can only get with a certain code, but these are your basics. And other swatches, you don't need to make the colors yourselves. Yes, you guys can go into swatches and just click on the one that you want. And if you go into new swatch, it should tell you how this color was made. So right now we can see that it has cyan and yellow 100%, and it made green. So that's the huge difference between RGB and CMYK. And yes, you can mess around with CMYK colors in order to make something for websites or anything on the screen. However, when it comes down to RGB, you usually don't want to mess around with this, printing this stuff out. Just because when you're printing, you're not gonna get the exact same thing that you're seeing on the screen. Whereas CMYK, if you just did this by mistake, you created something that's just for online and you're messing around with CMYK colors, it's not a big deal because you're still gonna see what you see on the screen. So generally speaking, if you're making something for a portfolio piece and you want to print it and make it look good, but also make it look good on the screen, I would suggest going to CMYK and just working with those colors right there. However, again, RGB, usually you get these really bright colors that you can only get on screens. Anyways, this episode's pretty short because I just wanted to show you the basics before we keep going into more stuff that's a little bit more advanced. So hopefully this will help you out at learning which type of file you guys want to start off with, plus getting you a little bit more into typography. And that would be it for today's episode. If you guys have any comments, questions, you guys can write down here in the comments area. Don't forget to subscribe and like. Thank you.